You remember the sky that day. It was a perfect, deep blue. Clouds drifted lazily across the horizon. You were thinking about ordinary things. You were probably thinking about dinner, or maybe that project for work, the little details of a life you took for granted, a life lived under a warm, yellow sun. Then you felt a change. It was not a sound or a tremor. It was a deep, sudden cold, a cold that bit through your clothes and into your soul. You looked up at the sun, and you watched it die. There was no explosion, no final, glorious burst of light. It simply went out. One moment it was a brilliant star. The next it was a black hole in the sky. The world fell into absolute darkness. The familiar blue was gone. The clouds vanished into the black. Streetlights flickered on in confusion. Their pale light seemed weak and afraid. People spilled out of buildings. They looked up at the hole where the sun should be. You heard murmurs and shouts of disbelief. You heard a child start to cry. Your own breath caught in your chest. Your mind refused to accept what your eyes were seeing. Stars do not just switch off. They burn for billions of years. This was impossible. Yet the evidence was all around you. The temperature was dropping fast. A strange twilight wind began to blow. It carried the scent of fear and ozone. You pulled your jacket tighter. You looked for familiar constellations. But there were only the cold, distant stars, and the new, terrifying black circle in your sky. This was not an eclipse. This was an ending. The great light of your world was gone. You stood there, frozen in the sudden night. You and 7 billion other souls, all staring into the void, all asking the same silent question. What happens now? The silence that followed was the worst part. The shouting died down into a collective hush, a planet holding its breath, waiting for the sun to come back. It never did. You were living on a dying world, and this was only the beginning. The final sunset was not just an event. It was a declaration of war from a foe you could not see. You just knew it was the end of everything. A final page turned on a book you loved. Little did you know, it was just chapter 1. The first 24 hours were chaos. Governments declared states of emergency. Experts tried to offer explanations. Their words were hollow and useless. They talked about stellar phenomena. They used long words you did not understand. But their voices trembled on the broadcasts. They were just as scared as you were. Then the reports started coming in. First from observatories on the far side of the planet. Then from deep space probes. The news was far worse than you imagined. Your sun was not the only one. Other stars were going out. A wave of darkness was spreading through the galaxy. It moved faster than light, faster than reason. Imagine a map of your star cluster. A beautiful spray of glowing points. Now imagine a bottle of black ink spilling across it. That was what was happening to your universe. The darkness was a tide. It swallowed stars and nebulae without a trace. It left nothing behind but cold and emptiness. An unnerving, perfect black. Experts called it a metaphysical event, a fancy way of saying they had no idea. They had spent their lives studying star science. Now the stars themselves were betraying them. You watched the data streams. You saw the star charts updating in real time. Red dots, representing living stars, winked out one by one. The blackness crept closer and closer. It was a silent, creeping doom, an infection in the heart of space. The cold you felt on that first night, it was spreading, leaking from the screen and into your home. One expert tried to offer a little hope. He joked that at least the light pollution was gone. No one laughed. The joke was a skull grinning in the dark. The fear was a physical thing now, You could feel it in the air. People stayed inside. The world ran on emergency power. But everyone knew the generators would not last forever. Food and water became precious. The old world of plenty was gone, replaced by a new world of rationing and waiting for the next star to vanish. You would look up at the night sky, trying to memorize the constellations that were left. You saw them as old friends, friends you were about to lose. One night, a famous star in a nearby system vanished. It was a star children learned about in school. Its disappearance felt personal, like losing a piece of your history. The darkness was not just out there in space. It was inside you now. A growing certainty that this was not natural. Something was causing this. Something was hunting the light. And it was coming for you. Panic gave way to a grim purpose. If the light was dying, humanity had to move. The leaders of the world announced the plan. It was called the Grand Exodus. A fleet of great arks would be built, massive ships designed for a journey across the void. They would carry the survivors of your species, a desperate gamble to find a new home. The construction was a global effort. Every factory was repurposed. Every mind was put to the task. The planet worked together with a unity born of terror. You watched the skeletons of the arks rise. They blotted out the remaining stars. They were not beautiful ships. They were brutalist things of metal and wire, built for survival, not for comfort. They were lifeboats for a drowning species. And you needed a ticket to get on board. Not everyone could go. The resources were too limited. The arks could only carry a fraction of the population. A lottery was held, a cruel game of chance. Your number was called. You felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. You had been chosen to live, while billions would be left behind, to freeze on a world without a sun. The day of departure arrived too soon. You said your goodbyes to the life you knew. You walked up the long ramp into the ark. The air inside smelled of sterilized metal and recycled oxygen. You found your small cabin. It was more of a pod than a room. You had a small screen and a storage locker. This would be your home for how long? No one knew. The engines of the ark hummed to life, a deep vibration that resonated in your bones. It was the sound of humanity's last hope, or its final, desperate gasp. Through a small viewport, you saw your world one last time, a dark sphere in a blacker void, the weak lights of the dying cities flickering out. You thought you saw your home, but it was just another light among many. Then the ark began to move. It pulled away from the planet, away from the solar system that had birthed you. You were now a refugee of the cosmos. The journey was long and silent. You passed the skeletal remains of dead stars, black cinders where brilliant suns once burned. The ark's sensors reported nothing but emptiness. Most of the journey was spent in a stasis sleep, a way to conserve resources and pass the time. But you had your turn on watch duty, staring at the screens, watching the nothingness go by. It was on one of those watches that you almost gave up hope. Years had passed. The darkness was absolute. Perhaps this was it, a long, slow drift into oblivion. Perhaps the darkness had already won. Your shift was almost over. Your eyes were tired from staring at the void. The sensor displays were a flat line, just the low hum of cosmic background radiation. You were about to log off, to surrender the watch to the next person. Then a new sound broke the monotony. A quiet, insistent beep. You froze. You listened again. Beep, beep, beep. It was a signal, clean and sharp against the static of space. Your heart hammered against your ribs. You ran a diagnostic check. The system was functioning perfectly. The signal was real. And it was coming from the void ahead. You brought the signal up on the main screen. It was not random noise. It was structured. A repeating pattern of pulses and pauses. It was deliberate. It was artificial. You called the bridge commander. Her voice was thick with sleep when she answered, but it became sharp and clear when you explained. Within minutes, the bridge was filled with people. The experts analyzed the signal. They confirmed what you already knew. It was a message, sent from an unknown source, in a language no one had ever heard. The signal was a beacon, a lighthouse in an ocean of night, and your ark was sailing right towards it. A debate immediately erupted. Was it a cry for help? A warning? Or was it a trap? A lure set by whatever was killing the stars? The captain had to make a choice. She stood before the main screen. The rhythmic pulse of the signal was like a heartbeat, a heart that still beat in the dead chest of the galaxy. She gave the order to change course. You would follow the signal to its source. The risk was enormous. But what was the alternative? To drift forever in the dark? To slowly run out of fuel and hope? This was the first new thing in years. The first sign that you were not alone. And that was a truth worth dying for. The ark turned its nose toward the signal. The powerful engines ignited once more. A new course was set. A new destination entered into the navigation computer. For the first time in a very long time, you felt something other than despair. It might have been curiosity. It might have been fear. But you let yourself believe it was hope. Even a false hope was better than none at all. You just hoped this discovery wasn't a joke, a cosmic prank at the universe's expense. The journey continued, but now it had a purpose. You were no longer just running away. You were running towards something, towards the source of the impossible signal, the signal from nowhere. The signal grew stronger with each passing day. Its pattern became clearer. It was complex, layered with information, a symphony of mathematics and logic. But its meaning was still a mystery. The ark traveled through what was once a dense star cluster. Now it was a graveyard, a region of absolute zero. The ship's outer hull frosted over. The cold of the void was relentless. Your sensors picked up the source first. A single point in the vast blackness. It was not a planet. It was not a ship of any known design. It was something else entirely. As you drew closer, its form became visible, a colossal structure floating in the emptiness. It was a space station. But that word felt too small, too simple for what you were seeing. Its design was alien. It had angles that seemed to hurt your eyes. It was made of a material that did not reflect light. It simply absorbed it, making it a hole in the darkness. It was immense. Your ark, a city-sized vessel, was a tiny insect next to it. The structure stretched for miles in every direction. A silent, unmoving titan in the void. There were no lights on the station. No signs of energy or life. It seemed abandoned, a ghost structure in a ghost galaxy. Yet the signal continued to pulse from its heart. The commander hailed the station. She sent messages in every known human language, then in pure mathematics. The only reply was the same, repeating signal. It was like knocking on the door of a tomb that was humming a strange tune. You wondered who had built it, and why they built it here, in the heart of the great dying. Someone on the bridge made a nervous joke. Maybe they forgot to pay their power bill too. The laughter was thin and sharp, a sound that did not belong in this solemn place. A decision was made to send a scout ship, a small vessel to get a closer look. You volunteered for the mission. You had to see it up close. You had to know. Your small ship detached from the Ark. It felt like a child leaving its mother's hand. You flew towards the silent black structure. Its scale was even more overwhelming from this perspective. You saw docking bays large enough to swallow fleets. You saw intricate patterns carved into its surface. They were not decorative. They looked like circuits, or perhaps a history written in a language of shapes. The signal led you to a specific point, a single, small opening in the station's hull. An airlock, maybe? It was perfectly matched to the size of your scout ship, as if it had been waiting for you. Your pilot hovered the ship at the entrance. He looked at you, his eyes wide. "What are your orders?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper. You looked at the dark tunnel ahead. You looked back at the distant light of the Ark. Behind you was the familiar dark. Ahead of you was a new kind of mystery. "We go in," you said. Your voice was steadier than you felt. "The signal wants us to." The scout ship moved forward. It slid into the opening. The darkness of the station swallowed you whole. The door closed behind you with a silent, final click. You were inside the ghost structure, and you were not alone. The signal stopped. It was replaced by a new sound, a voice, ancient and tired, and it was speaking directly to your mind. The voice in your head was not a sound. It was a feeling, a pressure of thoughts that were not your own. It was ancient, filled with a weariness that transcended time. It did not speak in a language you knew. It placed concepts directly into your mind, images, emotions, and stark, undeniable truths. You saw what the voice wanted you to see. You saw a galaxy teeming with life. Trillions of souls living on countless worlds. Their suns were bright and their futures were endless. It was a universe of vibrant, chaotic beauty. The voice identified itself, not with a name, but with a concept. They were the first, the tenders of the great star gardens. You understood them as the elders, ones, the elder. Ones were not biological beings, as you knew them. They were beings of pure energy, born in the heart of the first stars. They had watched the universe grow and evolve. They showed you their purpose. They nurtured emerging life. They guided the currents of star science. They were the silent guardians of existence. A thankless, timeless job. Then the voice showed you the enemy. It came from outside, from the absolute void between galaxies, a place where nothing should exist. It was a force of perfect logical negation. The voice could not give it a name. To name it was to give it power. It simply called it the harvester, the ender of things, the shadow that consumed light. You saw the harvester arrive in their galaxy. It came not with a fleet of ships at first. It came as a whisper, a code that infected technology, a doubt that infected minds. The first stars to die were dismissed as accidents, natural stellar decay. The elder ones knew better. They saw the pattern. They saw the cold, deliberate intelligence behind it. They warned the younger races. But the younger races were proud and foolish. They were like you. They did not believe in monsters from the dark. They thought it was a joke. The elder ones fought the harvester, a war on a scale you could not comprehend. They used nebulae as shields. They forged weapons from black holes. The conflict raged for 1,000,000 years. But the harvester did not fight to win. It fought to erase. It did not want territory or resources. It wanted silence. It wanted the universe to be reset to zero. The elder ones lost. Their energy faded. Their great civilization crumbled. This station, this ghost structure, was their final act. a message in a bottle thrown into a dying ocean. The voice showed you the harvester's method. It did not blow up stars. It inserted a tiny, complex machine into their core, a seed of anti-energy that simply undid them. It turned light back into nothingness. The message in your mind became a warning. The harvester was methodical. It was moving from galaxy to galaxy, erasing them one by one. Your galaxy was simply the next on its list. The voice of the elder. One's grew faint. Its energy was spent. It had waited for eons, waiting for someone to receive its final testament. This was its last duty. It left you with a final gift. A torrent of data downloaded directly into your ship's computers. Blueprints, star charts of the enemy's path, the science behind their terrible weapons, and one final, desperate idea. A seed of hope, a way to fight back. Then the voice was gone. The pressure in your mind vanished. You were alone again in the silence. Your pilot looked at you. His face was pale. Did you hear that? You could only nod. The knowledge you now possessed felt heavier than any star. The truth was so much worse than you feared. You returned to the Ark in a state of shock. The data from the Elder Ones was real. The ship's computers were struggling to process it all. The truth spread through the fleet like a virus. There was no more debate, no more uncertainty. This was not a natural disaster. This was a deliberate, systematic extinction event, an act of cosmic genocide. The stars were being murdered, each one a life snuffed out by an unseen hand. The realization changed everything. The fear you felt before was for a blind, uncaring universe. This new fear was for a universe that was actively hostile. A universe where something hated you for simply existing, for being a creature of light and warmth. The mood on the Ark shifted from despair to a cold, hard anger. You were not just refugees anymore. You were the survivors of an attack, the last witnesses to a silent massacre. You studied the data left by the Elder Ones. It was a library of sorrow. It contained the histories of 1,000 species, all of them erased by the harvester. You saw their art, their music, their science, worlds of incredible diversity and wonder, all of them now just memories in a dead station's computer. You felt a kinship with these lost souls. The Elder Ones had not just given you a warning. They had given you a responsibility, a duty to remember, a reason to fight. You were no longer just trying to save yourselves. You were trying to avenge a galaxy. A bold thought for a handful of refugees in a metal can. Some might have called it insane. But it was better than the alternative. You looked at the harvester's path, a trail of dead galaxies across the void. Your own Milky Way was next in line. The Ark's current position was directly in its path. You had run right into the jaws of the beast. There was no more running. The darkness was not just behind you. It was now in front of you as well. You were trapped on a small island of existence, and the tide was rising. The captain gathered everyone for a fleet-wide broadcast. Her face was grim on the view screen, but her eyes burned with a new fire. The fire of defiance. "We now know the truth," she said. Her voice was steady, echoing in every corridor. Our sons were taken from us. Our homes were destroyed by a foe we never knew. We are all that is left of our world, and we may soon be all that is left of this galaxy. We face an enemy that feeds on light, an enemy that desires only silence and darkness. We cannot outrun it. We cannot hide from it. There's only one choice left to us. We must face it. We must fight it. For every star that has been extinguished. Her words hung in the air. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a single voice cheered, then another. Soon the entire ark was filled with a roar of defiance. It was the sound of a species that had lost everything, a species with nothing left to lose, and that made you the most dangerous thing in the universe. You had the Elder One's knowledge. You had the anger of a wronged people. You looked out at the blackness. You were no longer afraid of it. You were going to set it on fire. The time for waiting was over. The harvester was coming. The Elder One's data gave you its exact location and trajectory. It moved with a chilling, predictable precision. You prepared for a battle you could not possibly win. The Ark was a refugee ship, not a warship. Its weapons were for asteroid defense, not for fighting a star-killing entity. But you had to try. You used the Elder One's blueprints. You modified your mining lasers. You repurposed your sensor arrays. You turned your plows into swords. A desperate, last-minute rearmament. The plan was simple: to make a stand, to die on your feet rather than in your sleep, to leave a scar on the thing that had killed your world. A final act of defiance. You stood on the bridge of the Ark. The entire command crew was at their stations. The silence was thick with tension. Every eye was on the main view screen. It showed the empty void ahead. The data said the enemy was there, but you could see nothing. Your sensors detected nothing. It was like waiting for a ghost. Then the first sign appeared. A distortion in space-time. A ripple in the fabric of the void, as if something very large was pushing it aside. The long-range sensors began to scream. "I have a contact," the sensor operator said. Her voice was tight. "No, not one contact. Hundreds, thousands." Then you saw them. They emerged from the darkness like a nightmare made real. They were not ships in the way you understood them. They were machines of pure shadow. Colossal structures that drank the light. Their hulls were the color of a dead star. Geometric shapes of impossible size. Wedges, spheres, and terrifying, spidery forms. The Shadow Fleet. They moved in perfect, silent formation. A fleet of mobile black holes. They blotted out the few remaining distant stars. They were the architects of the great dying. A wave of primal fear washed over you. This was the foe the Elder Ones had fought. This was the ender of galaxies. In person, it was so much worse than the recordings. The sheer scale of it was soul-crushing. One of the Shadow ships was larger than the others. A command vessel, perhaps. It was a perfect, massive hexagon. It radiated an aura of ancient, malevolent intelligence. You knew the mind of the harvester was there. Someone on the bridge made a choked sound. Another person started quietly praying. You felt your own resolve waver. How could you fight this? It was like trying to punch a hurricane. "They are not hailing us," the communications officer reported. Of course not. A butcher does not talk to the cattle. It simply sharpens its knives. The captain's voice cut through the fear. "All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill." Her voice did not shake. It was a rock in a sea of terror. "Target their lead vessel. We'll give them a welcome they won't forget." The Ark's modified weapon systems powered up. A pathetic gesture in the face of such overwhelming power. But it was your gesture. It was your final, angry shout into the void. You watched the Shadow Fleet advance, a wall of absolute blackness coming to consume you. You had found the monster in the dark. Now it had found you, and you were directly in its way.